Hello everyone, I'm Alex Dykes, and this is Alex on Autos Weekly. Let's dive right on into the news. The biggest news for me this week is that sadly the Buick Verano, which is one of my favorite small entry-level luxury cars, is no longer available with the 6-speed manual transmission. Up until this point, you could get the very nice 2-liter turbo from General Motors in that 6-speed manual form, which really made it a very solid entry when you compare it to something like the Acura ILX or even something like an Audi A3 or Mercedes-Benz CLA 250. It had a decent amount more power than the base versions of the A3, the Lexus CT, even the Volvo S60, etc. It's a nice little car. It handled very well, drove very nicely, and you could get it with that 6-speed manual. Sadly, however, Buick tells us that the sales just were not very good for that manual transmission, so they have killed it for this model year. Next up, Subaru has announced the price for the 2015 Subaru Outback, and it is $425 larger than last year. It's really not a bad increase when you consider that the Outback hasn't really increased too much in price over the last few years that it's been on the market. It really looks like a very good car. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to see it in person or to drive it. Subaru doesn't seem to be talking to me at the moment, so if you do know any contacts at Subaru, especially in their PR department, go ahead and have them email me at alex@alexandautos.com. They're really the only car company that won't really give me the time of day. So if you do have a connection, go ahead and let me know. Drop a comment in that comment section down below or drop me an email. Would like to get in contact with Subaru and test the Outback as well as the new Legacy. The last item of news is that Ford has finally released pricing and official specifications for the brand new Ford Transit van. This is going to be replacing the E-Series van in the United States eventually. Ford has said that they are going to be producing the Transit, also known as the T-Series vans, side by side with the E-Series vans for a decent amount of time. Pricing on the Transit is now going to be just under $30,000 starting, and there are 3 different engines available at launch. There's the 3.7-liter naturally aspirated V6, there's a twin-turbo 3.5-liter V6, very similar to what you find in the F-150 pickup truck. There's also a 3.2-liter 5-cylinder diesel engine, which is really the engine that I find very interesting. That diesel engine will produce 185 horsepower and about 350 pound-feet of torque, which is not too far off what you find in the Ram ProMaster van, also known as the Fiat Ducato. But what is very different is that Ford is mating this to a very traditional automatic transmission and not the single-clutch robotic transmission that you find in the ProMaster van. So the driving experience should be very, very normal in the Ford van versus something that's very different to American shoppers over in the Ram. Because the drivetrain is relatively similar to what you find in the F-150, we're being told that towing capacity is at 7,500 pounds, which is a decent bump over that Ram ProMaster as well. And now we turn to reader emails, and my first reader email is from Sahid, and we're here at the whiteboard because Sahid is asking about entry-level luxury vehicles. He was talking about the Lexus IS 250 versus something like an Audi A4, perhaps a Volvo S60, and what the real differences were in terms of driving dynamics. And for that, a whiteboard is probably the easiest way to show this difference. Now, in something like a Volvo S60, we have the engine right here. I'm not very good at drawing, so you do have to keep in mind that. So we have the engine right there, and then we have the front wheels right here below them. Now you notice where this puts the weight. So the weight is basically right over the front wheels. If we take a look at an Audi A4, the front wheels are over here, and the engine is actually entirely in front of the front axle. And that's because of the way the Audi transmission is designed. The Audi transmission, which is right back here, has the output shaft for the front wheels right inside the same casing as the transmission, and it's actually right behind the torque converter, which is right about here in the transmission. So the engine is entirely in front of the front axle. Now if you compare these forms of drivetrain layout to something like a Lexus IS, a Mercedes-Benz C-Class, or a BMW 3 Series, they have the front wheel positioned right here in the car. This also goes for the Cadillac ATS and CTS. The engine actually typically starts right on top of the front axle, with the majority of the engine being behind the front axle, and that places the transmission right back here, well behind the front axle. And this is very good for weight balance, and this is why these kinds of vehicles typically have a 50-50 weight balance, and these cars have what we normally refer to as a front-heavy weight balance. Now many people confuse front-heavy systems like this, where more than 50% of the weight, 50% plus, is in front of the front axle with front-wheel drive biased systems. Now this Volvo system right over here is definitely a front-wheel drive biased system because the front wheels are getting all the power until something slips, and then the power is sent to the rear. The system can lock up a clutch pack right in the middle and send pack to the rear at times where there's no slip going on, but the front wheels can never be removed from the equation. So unless slip happens, 50-50 is all you get power distribution-wise. 50 to the front, 50 to the rear. Now over here in Audi land, things are different. Even though the engine is entirely in front of the axle, and this results in a front-heavy weight distribution for the car, this is not necessarily a front-wheel drive biased system. So the Audi transmission actually is a traditional rear-wheel drive ZF transmission like you'll find in the BMW products like here. So that's a ZF transmission. This is also a ZF transmission, except that this ZF transmission has the all-wheel drive module integrated into the transmission case. Now, the way Audi designs their all-wheel drive systems, they do use a torsion or torque distributing center differential, so they can actually decide how much power by default they want to put on each axle. So they actually can give it a front biased or a rear biased all-wheel drive system. Audi typically goes for a slight rear-wheel drive bias or a very 50-50 power balance. Now, back over here in BMW land, the way they do all-wheel drive is that we have a power takeoff shaft coming out of the back of the transmission, then we have a transfer case back here, and that sends power back to the front wheels. That's essentially what's going on in the Audi system, except that Audi wraps it all inside the same case. Now, why weight balance is important is primarily focused on neutral handling situations. Now, in most cornering situations, the advice generally is that you shouldn't be braking, you shouldn't be applying power. Of course, everybody breaks all those rules in sports driving as well as in regular driving. But this is basically the difference between a perfectly balanced car and a front-heavy car. So a front-heavy car will tend to keep pointing in the direction that it was going. It will resist its input turning. So that's what we call understeer. So the car goes that way, it's not really steering properly. Now, a perfectly balanced car with perfectly balanced tires, perfectly balanced weight, etc., in theory, in this same situation, should tend to rotate more gracefully, and even though it will still leave the arc if you're going too fast, it will be pointing approximately somewhere in the middle. So the rear end won't be wagging way out there, and the top of the car won't be pointing straight ahead. It'll actually be kind of cruising along that way. And that is a little bit more natural for an awful lot of people. However, if you had to choose between oversteer and understeer, then the understeer is usually the more predictable form. The result of this is that in the comparison that I was asked about, the Lexus IS 250 has the much better driving dynamics than the Audi. It feels lighter, it feels better out on the road, it definitely has a solid rear-wheel drive dynamic, whereas the Audi A3 has either a front-wheel drive dynamic or an all-wheel drive dynamic, and that's just a matter of personal preference. I tend to prefer the rear-wheel drive driving dynamic most of the time. I do really love all-wheel drive, however. Now, that being said, most people aren't on a track every day, so honestly, it really doesn't matter for the vast majority of drivers out there, and that's when the other features of the car play more role for me. Although there's a decent amount of disagreement about this, I actually like the way the Lexus IS looks. I think it's actually quite attractive on the front, especially in the F-Sport model. We also get a decent amount more rear legroom than you'll find in the Audi A3. However, I think that the Audi A3's design will overall age just a little bit better than the Lexus. It's also a little bit less in your face, which is not something I'm used to saying about Lexus. They are normally a little bit more demure, but that's really what I like about Lexus's new designs. They're definitely more striking than we've found out of Lexus in the past. In terms of infotainment, Audi definitely leads the pack versus Lexus, and in terms of drivetrain, Audi actually leads Lexus as well. That's mostly due to the engines, however, as well as the transmissions, not necessarily where the engines, transmissions, and all-wheel drive systems are located in the vehicle, however. Audi, of course, uses ZF's 8-speed transmission. Lexus is mostly stuck with the 6-speed automatic transmission unless you get the F-Sport models where you can get the 8-speed automatic in certain models of the IS. Even though the IS is likely going to be the most reliable entry in this luxury segment, if my money were on the line, I would probably buy the A4 given these options. I really like Audi's engine lineup better than Lexus's engine lineup. Lexus's small V6 in the IS 250 is a very nice engine, it's very smooth, but it's also notably down on power when you compare it to the 2-liter turbocharged engine from Audi in the A4. We also have the Audi S4, and its engine is much more powerful than you'll find in the Lexus IS 350. When it comes to straight-line performance, which is really what's most important for the vast majority of drivers out there, the Audi A4 will beat its comparable Lexus competitor every time. If you're looking at the A4 and the IS 250, you might also want to give the Volvo S60 T5 all-wheel drive or the T6 all-wheel drive a solid look as well. The T5 all-wheel drive will give you about the same amount of power or a little bit more, and all-wheel drive as well. You get about the same kind of fuel economy, a little bit lower in that Volvo, but the price tag is going to be notably lower than the IS 250 or that Audi A4 2.0T. My second question today also involves the whiteboard, and this question comes from Brad, and it's all about tires. He's seeing some ripples in his sidewalls of some new tires from Big O Tire, and this is sort of taking a look from the center of the tire towards the outside edge of the tire. You can see that the sidewall is going along and then it sort of ripples in and then pops back out again. Now, the answer from all my tire sources is that this can happen and it is relatively normal. So basically, if you're taking a look at the tire like this, then there are these ripples that go this way in the tire. You can sort of think of them as kind of pucker marks in the tire. Now, what I seem to get from most tire companies and most tire guys out there, unofficially of course, is that in general, the more expensive the tire, the less you will see this. So if you get a luxury or performance vehicle, you're not going to see this as much. But cars with taller sidewalls, so that's the distance between this portion of the tire and this portion of the tire. So the larger that is, then the more you may see this in your tire. I'm told that this does not affect the performance or the longevity of your tire, but most importantly, I'm also told that tire companies will not take tires back for this kind of defect in the tire, if you can even call it a defect. Personally, I kind of call it a defect because I think it looks ugly on the tire, but I'm told that you can't return your tire for this particular reason. Now, I am told that if you do get a bulge in your tire, so rather than having this pucker mark go into the tire like that, if you actually get a bulge up out of the tire like that, then that is cause for alarm, and you should return your tires right away to the tire repair shop, and they should replace the tires for that. So if you have any bulging, sort of bulging bumps like that, sort of like a boil on your tire, or if these striations on the tire are poking out of the tire rather than into the tire, then you should definitely take your tire back to the tire repair shop, and they should replace that under warranty. Before we sign off this week, I have one question for you, and that's minivan versus three-row crossover. This week I have a Toyota Sienna, and you can expect the review on that one coming up in about 2 weeks or so. But right now I'm kind of debating about what to compare the Toyota Sienna to. I mean, obviously there are those direct minivan comparisons, but I personally think that the Sienna compares very well to something like a Toyota Highlander. It's far more practical than a Highlander, especially if you are carrying 7 or 8 passengers. The fuel economy is about the same. It has all-wheel drive. The particular version that I'm testing right now does at any rate. The all-wheel drive system, the engine, and the transmission are essentially the same ones that you find in the Toyota Highlander. So I'm really struggling why you would buy a Toyota Highlander if you really needed that third row over a Toyota Sienna. Do let me know in the comments section down below. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been Alex and Autos Weekly. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of my latest videos. You can also send your emails and questions to alex@alexandautos.com, and you can find me at facebook.com/alexandautos. I'll see you next week. You see, Rob, the problem is if you had your front wheel positioned here like this, and then you had the front of the vehicle like that, and then you had the cat right up here up front, and then we just had nothing in the back and just a wheel back there, then we definitely have a solid front wheel heavy vehicle like that. So there's definitely a awful lot more weight right here under the front axle than you would find under the rear axle, and that would cause some adverse handling characteristics.